The second part of this program today is going to be a panel of experts. We have, thank you, we have Ray Colmenar, Senior Program Manager for the California Endowment. You want to find your chair over there. Justin Davis, Program Coordinator for MitchellKpoor Foundation, and Jason Tremieux, who's the Managing Director of the Roberts Enterprise Development Fund. If everyone can find their seats, please, will the audience just join me in welcoming these panelists?
Thanks, Peta. And those of you who did the slides are not off the hook. Don't be shy. Come on up and find your seats as well. We're going to have a moderated discussion with the panel as a whole, and that way, when we segue to audience Q&A, if you have questions for those who you've heard from so far, you can also ask the panel as a whole. But we've prepared just a few discussion questions to help get us started. And so Seema's asked me to moderate because her voice is a little going in and out. So, but are you hanging in there? Okay. And the first question is for the panelists who've just joined us, Ray, Justin, and Jason. Please tell us a bit about your foundation and its strategy around supporting Black men and boys. And Ray, yeah, you looked right at me when I said it, so pick on you first.
Good morning, everybody. I want to thank you all for coming, and also I want to thank Greg, actually, for describing a lot of the work that we're doing, so I don't have to go into a lot of detail. I'm with the California Endowment, and I'll just say a little bit about what I do there, and then describe a little bit how we got to this work, because I think it's a story that can illustrate why the foundation's doing this work. So I have two hats at the foundation. I lead the statewide neighborhoods team, and the neighborhoods team focuses on healthy environments, building community health. And then the second piece is coordinating our efforts statewide around boys and young men of color. And I'll describe how we're structured because I think it's illustrative about how the foundation's trying to make a difference around young males as part of its overall strategy. So the endowment, just briefly, is a statewide foundation. We work at the state policy level, and we also have partnerships in 14 communities around the state. And here in the Bay Area, we're deeply in East Oakland and Richmond. And so what we're trying to do with the Boys and Men of Color work is that, when we did the strategic plan about 3 years ago, our board recognized that we needed to really work in communities that really were suffering the most dramatic health disparities, issues of poverty, violence, healthcare disparities, et cetera. And so that commitment really led us to making sure that we embedded equity issues, health equity issues, in the overall work of the foundation. So that was one key factor, was our board committing to equity. And then second, of course, our CEO, Dr. Robert Ross, really carried that out in implementing the strategy. And in that focus, we looked at the data around the state and in the communities that we were about to partner with. And if you look across the data, first, the demographics are such that over 70%, on almost all the communities, an overwhelming majority of the population are communities of color. And in many of the communities, I think in all of them, maybe except for one, the majority are Latinos. And then at the same time, the health disparity issues were greatest for Latinos and African Americans. So for us to say we are going to build healthy communities in California, it was an imperative to actually look at the issues that are of greatest concern to that population. And so that's how we got to begin to think about boys and young men of color. So I'll just say another couple of minutes, and then we can do the rest in Q&A. So we have 3 program areas. One is focused on healthcare, and our priority there is around implementation of the Affordable Care Act, which is affecting all communities, especially young men of color who are going to be potentially newly eligible around the Affordable Care Act. The second area is our neighborhoods program, and in that work, it's about creating healthy community environments, and included in that is the way our neighborhoods are developed, the way our neighborhoods are organized, as well as issues of violence and community safety. And then the third area is schools, because we know that children and families really rely on educational systems, both in terms of the quality of the education, but also the quality of the environment in the schools. And so what we're struggling with at the foundation, and Greg mentioned some of this in his description about the work that we're supporting, is how to implement those three program areas in a way where we're intentionally looking at the implications for young males. And so what we're doing at the endowment, which I think is a challenge, but I think ultimately will lead to better results, is that we're not creating a separate initiative focused on young males. We're struggling to make sure that every part of the foundation, all the program officers that are working on schools, healthcare, and neighborhoods, are thinking about equity issues and how it affects young males. Now, that is easier said than done. That's why we have a team internally. I coordinate the statewide work. We have local program officers that I work with closely so that the work is intentionally being embedded in the local work as well as the statewide work, but it's still a work in progress. We've learned some lessons, and we can share some of that going forward.
And Justin,
All right.
Program Manager for MitchellKpoor Foundation, welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Again, my name is Justin Davis. I'm the Program Manager at the MitchellKpoor Foundation. We are a private family-based foundation in Oakland, California. We recently moved to Oakland from San Francisco, and we're very happy to be in the Oakland community and in an environment in which a lot of our work is happening and being done. We support organizations that provoke social change en route to equality. We are very intentional about working with organizations who are on the ground, who may not get a high level or a high amount of funding from a lot of these larger organizations, and creating a gateway for them to receive those dollars eventually. So we focus on primarily two areas, and that is civic engagement and college readiness for Black males. As Greg mentioned earlier, some foundations are or just foundations, organizations, or whomever may be a little hesitant to use the word Black. I would say we are unapologetic. If you are familiar with our board chairs, Mitch and Frida Kpoor Klein, we love supporting Black communities. We love supporting Black males, and that is our college readiness work is directly for them, and we look to work with programs that exclusively work with Black males. Through our College Bound Brotherhood program, we have done a lot of work in the community. As some of you may have known, we have recently gone through a pivot of sorts, a directional pivot, and now we are using technology as a kind of way to accelerate the work that organizations are doing, and we are trying to help organizations leverage technology and tech tools with their missions. And that has been evident in some of the work we've been doing around college readiness, around applications, and working with startups and putting them in positions to work with organizations in the community. The College Bound Brotherhood are going through an evolution of sorts. We're fairly young. This program area was started in 2008, and as we have primarily focused on college readiness, we have sought the opportunity to expand that work, and through a partnership with the College Access Foundation in California and the Marcus Foster Education Fund, let me recognize two of my colleagues that have been working extremely hard with making that happen. That's Tamara Moore and Alicia Dixon. Hi, thank you for all your hard work. And through this partnership, we're not only looking to increase college readiness for Black males, but also college enrollment, college persistence, and college completion. A continuum of success, as I would like to call it, and we are just very excited about this work, and we see this as an opportunity to really create exponential amount of success for Black males in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Thanks, Justin. Next up is Jason Tremieux with the RedF Institute Foundation. I think the F used to stand for foundation, but I'll let you explain.
I will explain. Good morning, everybody. Jason Trimieux with RedF, the Roberts Enterprise Development Fund. And, I'm going to take a really focused look here in talking about our work because we're really singularly focused on jobs and employment. And I think, as we talk about a lot of these issues, and I certainly also want to echo what some of the other panelists have said about Greg's overview. There are so many issues that are affecting black men, and a lot of this hangs together around employment. And it's not the only issue, certainly, but we are talking about employment leading to a lot of other things in our lives. And I think any of us probably sitting in this room who have had a job at any point in our lives, we know that for ourselves, that employment is more than just a paycheck. It's about a sense of community. It's a sense of, it instills dignity. It instills a sense of contribution. And so RedF has been around 15 years. We've been focused on job creation through something called social enterprise, which essentially are nonprofit operated businesses that expressly and intentionally employ individuals facing significant barriers to employment. And so even as we look at the unemployment situation facing African American males, we certainly understand that even in a good economy, there are individuals who, because they have been involved in the justice system or because they have mental health issues or other types of barriers, are persistently locked out of the workforce. And so RedF's strategy to address that over the last 15 years has been to help build the capacity of nonprofit organizations here in the Bay Area and now also in Southern California to start or grow businesses that serve the marketplace, providing goods or services that are demanded in the marketplace, with, again, intentionally employing in those businesses the individuals that they serve. Our own experience has been that of our portfolio, the organizations that we support, and we're an intermediary, so I have one question actually down the road for our research is the role of intermediaries who won't show up necessarily on these as grant makers because of their status, but who focus on these issues. We're an intermediary organization, so we do provide grants, but we also provide some pretty intensive capacity building assistance to nonprofit organizations. And our own experience has been that predominantly the employees employed in the portfolio organizations that we have supported have been men of color. And so we believe that the strategy that we have undertaken to create these jobs is an effective strategy to move men of color, African American men in particular, who are face persistent and chronic unemployment into the workforce, and to do so in a sustainable way. So these enterprises, of course, also earn revenues from the sales of goods and services that ultimately, if they're successful, are covering the cost of, if you will, what would otherwise be an ongoing need for philanthropy and public subsidy. RedF has expanded our work from here in the Bay Area, supporting a set of organizations, to Southern California. I lead our work around national expansion as we think about how to scale the impact of social enterprise. And one of the things that I'll talk about a little bit later, but I want to put a teaser out for us now, is as we think about the issues that are in these various reports about the issues facing males of color, especially around employment, that there are some new financing mechanisms that are being explored in this country, things that you may have heard termed social impact bonds or pay for success initiatives. These are things that RedF has taken some interest in, that we are actively trying to engage in, because ultimately what we're talking about is the fact that the disproportionate impacts faced in our community, that there's the significant public cost associated with that, and we know that, and we can actually monetize that. We know exactly what it costs to incarcerate somebody. We know exactly the fact that the connection between if you're not employed and you're coming out of the criminal justice system, if you're not able to get onto a job in fairly short order, there's a strong likelihood that you're going back. And so if we're able to attach and take this data and make the explicit connection between the public costs that we incur as a community, there are some new financing vehicles that potentially could shift some of the risk for these interventions like social enterprise and others that you hear here to the private sector. And when those public savings are achieved, the government actually pays the investors back. And you could potentially see some significant shifting of capital that right now sits on the sideline, does not impact our community, doesn't go after some of these promising initiatives, I'll talk a little bit about that later, but that's essentially where RedF has been focused on for the last 15 years.
Thanks, Jason. The next questions are intended for the panel as a whole. This one is based kind of on something Seema said a little while ago at the top of the program about the Foundation Center's report, and how she noted that while philanthropic funding for Black men and boys is currently low, there has been a modest increase in recent years. And in addition, the report suggests that we're at an important moment in time in the field, given recent large commitments that have been made by high-profile individuals such as Michael Bloomberg and George Soros, as well as other emerging initiatives by a number of prominent foundations, some of which you just heard about. So in your opinion, are we at a tipping point? Is there anything that's different or unique about the current batch of foundation initiatives compared to previous work in the field? And I think I'm going to pick on maybe Justin or Jason to kick us off, since you're currently with Foundation, so you've probably been watching your colleagues in the field, and then we'll loop back to Greg and the others on the panel who want to weigh in.
Jason.
Sure. So I would just say, I mean, I thought, Greg, your point earlier was very on point, that we have a field is kind of, this historic moment. And it's unfortunate that we have a field, but we have a field. And I think, from I guess where we sit, I mean, we're a fairly small organization. We've been just working in California. And I want to be clear, as an organization, explicitly a focus on Black males and employment of Black males is not, you won't find that explicitly in our mission. But because we're focused on employment, and because we're focused on not just employment, but employment of people who face significant barriers to employment, as I said, our data is very clear that employment of Black males has been the predominant group that we have been impacted by our work. I think another thing, I'm probably not trying to steal Greg's thunder, because he said a lot that was very profound, but this concept of collective impact, which agreed is nothing particularly new, but I think is helpful. And I think the examples he gave of where these funders are starting to work together, I mean, even Justin, just what you mentioned about College Access Foundation and others that are coming to the table, where we're really looking at how we could be more coordinated and kind of put some of what historically may have been, parochial funding aside, and say, we're really dealing with a pervasive problem. And this is not a new problem we're facing. And so if we're really going to be serious about dealing with this, we do have to work collectively, and that means sharing both the risk and sharing the upside and the downside when we make mistakes and fund the wrong things or go the wrong way. And that's going to take some time to still overcome that inertia, but I do think you're starting to see that.
Yeah.
Justin?
So if you would have asked me that, I would say 2 years ago, I probably would have thought it's probably just a hot topic in philanthropy right now. And now I think it really has become an initiative in which foundations and organizations are adhering to the problem. People of power, for example, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, George Soros, who are speaking publicly about the issue and are coming forward with their own resources and putting them at the table, and then and speaking to the issue, and then not only that, putting people of color in positions of power to inquire, to invest, and to act on the issue. I think that's what changes the landscape, and where we've, in the Black community, we've for years, eons, have been on the soapbox talking about the issues within our community. And then when you have the opportunity for wealthy white people to speak and come to the table, I think that's when we say, okay, yes, this is a problem. And the thing is that they recognize the collective impact that this subset within the community has on the community as a whole. And I think that's what's important to recognize. So I think we really are at a shift in terms of where we're going in supporting young Black men and boys, and this entire piece of work.
So it sounds like a hopeful moment.
Absolutely.
Ray, would you agree?
Yeah, I'll add to that, and then I'll have an observation that has implications for the Foundation Center report. So I agree with Justin that leadership matters, and there seems to be some willingness of leaders in philanthropy to really have this conversation now. In fact, one of the things that my CEO, Dr. Robert Ross, has been doing. For those of you who some of you may know that he took 3 months off this summer to essentially go around the country and interview leaders in the field to talk about black male achievement, boys and young men of color. And so he came back energized around providing more leadership to the field. He recognized that there were leaders out there that really were ready to step out. And so actually this spring at the Council on Foundations, he invited some CEOs of the major foundations around the country to have a conversation about this. And he got a lot of positive response. So we don't know what's going to come out of that conversation, but the fact of just having, at least in my foundation, the leadership at the top matters if the foundation's going to put resources behind it. So one of the observations that he had when he interviewed people around the country was that a lot of this work was being led by folks in the middle of the organization, program officers, program directors who cared about this issue, passionate about it, like kind of what Greg was talking about. But very few were like being led by kind of executive leadership. And so one of the things he wanted to do is figure out, hey, how can, we gotta provide some backup to the folks in philanthropy who are trying to do this work, and we can't do that unless we get the boards and CEOs to actually give some space for the folks that are trying to do the work. So I'm hopeful because of that. So one implication for the Foundation Center, I actually think that the explicit versus implicit is an interesting conversation because we want everybody, all the foundations who may not be able to say, okay, I'm going to create a black male project or a Latino male project, to still really invest in kind of what we need to invest in. So it would be great to think about how do you actually collect data for education funders or health funders or other funders who are trying to really get to the communities that are that would give you more impact if the goal is to try to change systems. So Greg talked a little bit about Tony Smith, right? He recognized that if he doesn't create an African American Male Achievement Office, that the system itself is going to not be successful. So how do you do that for foundations in terms of, holding philanthropy accountable to their mission, not about like black males or Latinos, but to the mission of those institutions?
And Greg, I see you leaning in.
Oh, I was going to give Mark a chance.
Oh,
sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't see Mark.
Well,
but we can go back to Mark.
I really agree with what I've heard Jason, Justin, and Ray say at this point. And I think the thing I'd add to this is sort of 2 points. When we think about somebody like Michael Bloomberg, and it's been great to see someone at that level with that role in the society, that role as a mayor of New York, as a wealthy individual, say, I'm going to put my own money into this. It's interesting to me that Bloomberg made his money as an investor, right? So when people judge the measure of their success as an investor, they don't say how much money did you put in. They say how much return on investment came out. So for me, I'm hopeful because having given 20 or so years of doing this work, that I think there is a forward movement. I don't think I could characterize it as a tipping point quite yet. Malcolm Gladwell talks about tipping point in his book, and from an epidemiological point of view, a tipping point is when a disease goes from being isolated cases to being epidemic to being a pandemic. So a tipping point is when you get just enough that's going to push it over, and then you're going to see massive impact. And in the point of view from a disease perspective, you're going to see some really negative things happen. So if we flip that and say, is there a tipping point in the field for African American men and boys and our outcomes? What I personally want to see is I want to see a shift in how many more kids are graduating from high school. I want to see a shift in how many more kids aren't going to San Quentin and Santa Rita. I want to see how many kids are actually being prepared to take the jobs that Jason and others are preparing them for, not just the jobs we have now, but in a 21st century global economy. So in other words, I want to see not only our kids sort of catch up to where they're supposed to be now, but exceed that so that they can actually participate in the next economy, not in the economy that's dying now. So for me, I'm hopeful when I see Dr. Ross, the sabbatical that he had where he went around the country and studied. Some of you saw the interview he did with Tavis Smiley, which is very unusual for a foundation president to be on a television show using the words black and male in the same sentence. And yeah, and being able to really, sort of make the case. So is it different? Yes. Is it unique? For those of us who've been doing this for a while, yes. Are we satisfied that we're now at a place where we can sort of put a stake in it and say claim victory at a certain point? No. Because until we can see fewer kids being shot on the streets of Oakland and Richmond and Chicago and in Los Angeles, until we can see more people with the outcomes. So I'm optimistic, but I'm also realistic about, as I've seen philanthropy operate over the last 25 years or so, I just add 5 more years to the work just sitting here, right? But, in the early 90s, there was a big push around black children, things like freedom schools, beacon centers. We had a lot of investment being sort of pushed that way, and the conversations in those days where you couldn't really say it out loud, that you were really serving African-American boys and girls, but that you were serving all children. And so you had to kind of, in your RFP responses, you had to sort of play the word game and cover that over, but you knew the work you were doing in that disproportionately affected at-risk community was the code word for black folks, right? So there's something about, those of us who have been doing this for a while have seen it go in these cycles. And my concern is that we'll have this big push for a few years and then it'll retrench based on the politics of the country, based on what we've seen in terms of, quote, a post-racial America, which is not the case. And we've seen people say, well, we got a black president, everything's solved, right? No. Let's be real clear about it. No, right? So I just think that, again, hopefulness around it, and it's nice, and Ray put it well, when you can see inside foundations, it goes from the mid-level manager, program officers conversation and the portfolios that they've invested in to now foundation leadership and ultimately their boards. Yep. That's when you're going to really see, to me, a tipping point. If the big players in the field start pushing it as they've begun to, and their boards say, we're going to give you a 10-year commitment around black boys, or a 20-year commitment, or however long it takes. And it's not going to go away when the leadership changes. It's not going to go away when it's not the issue of the moment. Then I think we will have reached a tipping point.
So maybe not the tipping point, but starting to see a mainstreaming of dialogue around it.
I'll accept that language, yes.
Yeah, but not mission accomplished,
Not-
which we all agree.
no,
We all agree.
No,
So,
thank you.
Mark.
I didn't have anything to add.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
No, that was, you said it all.
Okay. Wanted to give you a chance just in
Thank you,
case.
thank you.
All right.
Right.
Well, Ray mentioned, and Greg, you too, Dr. Ross's work, CEO of the California Endowment, and one of his quotes actually kicks off our next question, which is, he said, the crisis in young African American males is viewed by many as too complicated, too thorny, and even intractable. But these are precisely the kinds of social challenges that philanthropy must dare invest in. So given how complicated these issues are, can each of you share one thing philanthropy can do to move the needle in improving life outcomes for black men and boys? And yes,
Start,
Jason.
because I wanted to actually pick up on something that was just said. And, one of the things that I've always appreciated about hearing Dr. Ross speak is the use of statistics. And certainly those are affirmed in the reports that we have in front of us. But on the kind of next sentence, we should start following with the evidence-based programs that are having impact. And I think, so to answer your question directly, I think for philanthropy, we're hearing this term, and, I can certainly fall prey to, picking up on the next new thing. But for foundations to really invest in helping organizations measure impact and course correct around programmatic needs as evidence starts to come in saying things are working or not working, and then invest in the things that really are having an impact. And I think that that's a new opportunity, or maybe not a new opportunity, but an opportunity that, because we have so much clear data suggesting not just what the need of the problem is, but the fact that we know the investment does not match the need of the problem. But we also are starting to have good examples of programs that are really having an impact on black male achievement. And so we need to start advocating for, among philanthropy, investing in those efforts to bring them to scale, as well as investing in organizations that are trying evidence-based ideas, even if the evidence base is still not strong yet, but is promising, so that these organizations can really grow the evidence that suggests that what they're doing, whether it's College Brown Brotherhood or others, these things are actually having the intended impact. And then I think we will really start to see all this money that is supposedly lined up against these initiatives actually going to things that are producing the outcomes that we know we need in order to, as I think has been said, get to that tipping point when we actually don't just have a clear expression of the problem, but we actually have a clear pathway of some of the solutions that are going to help us deal with these problems, in a significant way.
So investing in outcomes and evaluation, and then sharing that knowledge, right? Because sometimes that's invested in, but then nobody shares it.
Yeah, and just one point on that, just recognizing that takes time.
Yeah.
So not to
Yeah.
just say we're going to, give you this resource for, but we want these results,
In 12 months.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would say even there's a pre-investment in the design of the outcome evaluation so that we are clear about what it is that we're measuring and what we can credibly say, when we get to the end of it as this worked or it didn't work. And now we have the resources to be able to invest further to scale or to course correct to other efforts that we think would have the intended impacts.
Anyone else have another one thing that philanthropy can do?
I'll add the one thing I'm currently, it's like one of my favorite things right now within what we're trying to do at the endowment that I think addresses multiple goals. So I like it for that reason, but also I think if we look back 10 years from now, it may be one of the most important things we are doing with regards to the boys and young men of color work, and that's the investment in the youth leadership and youth organizing work that's part of our work. So I said before that we're trying to embed this work in terms of the whole strategy. So lifting up one thing is going to be difficult, but I think the one signature thing that I think we can lift up is the youth leadership, youth organizing, and for three reasons. One is, I think we've learned there's some evidence in terms of just for young people who may be disconnected, young people who are struggling, like the youth engagement, engaging that young person, getting him involved in work that's about community building, that's about serving, has its own value as a youth development strategy, right? So it has a healing and development component to it. The second is because we talked a lot about the images that are out there about young males, black males in particular. So the youth engagement, engaging them in advocacy, engaging them in leadership, changes the perception, changes the conversation about young males. Greg mentioned that we had over 100 young people went to Sacramento last August to testify about what they were concerned about in the state of California. And I saw that, I witnessed that, and the legislators were moved. I mean, it was amazing. One of my colleagues used to be a member in the legislature, and she said like she had never seen a hearing like that when you had young people telling their story in an impactful way. And I went to some of the visits that they did. And so to me, that changes the way we think about young males. And then the third, of course, is just the organizing aspect of it. Builds constituency, builds power, and influences decisions by policymakers and other decision makers. So that's what I would like offer as a one thing that I think might be helpful to invest in going forward.
Thanks, Ray. Any other one things?
I would just add to remain strategic in what we're trying to accomplish. This issue is layered and complex, and we need to really think hard about what's our path towards the end goal. And sometimes it is working across across the table, working with other foundations. It's sometimes taking a step back and letting another foundation step up because they're more seasoned in this particular area. When we have conversations and dialogues like these, I think it gives everyone in the room opportunity to become more familiar with the scope of work that's happening and what's happening in the field. And I just when we have, again, just these type of opportunities, we remain strategic in everything that we're doing across the board. I think that's when we soon get those tangible results, and that's when we see that needle slowly start to move. And while that needle is moving, we must remain patient with ourselves, our work, and also our boards must remain patient because I think they always are expecting this immediate impact and measurable impact, but it's not that, it doesn't happen like that.
Well, how many board members are in the room today?
Yeah.
Anybody want to own it?
Yeah,
So we have some board education to do, it sounds like.
absolutely.
All right. And do I have a fourth one thing?
Well, if I could just say, as a grantee, I think one of the things that I'm always constantly bumping up against is the sort of rule-bound nature that we endure as grantee organizations, right? So, we live in a very rule-bound society, and I think that bleeds into how we do our grant making. And unfortunately, it sometimes precludes organizations that are recipients from chasing down the mission, right? So sometimes you just want to give resources that allow the organization to chase down that mission, but they're precluded from using the funds in that way. And so, and I think it encumbers the ability for groups to really make good in a meaningful way. And sometimes you have to use those resources to keep the lights on, but you can't do that. And so, there, I think, needs to be a really concrete conversation around flexible use of funding and how organizations can use resources to do things that are in service to the mission versus a particular project objective. So.
And that, I can tell you, is something that all organizations, regardless of their mission, ask for. So we do hope that foundations listen, the more leaders stand up and say that, because more often than not, they run off and, let the tail wag the dog, do the program, so.
I want to add something. I'd really be interested in what Seema has to say on this one, too, having done the research and what people in the foundation community may have said. I associate myself again with all the comments that have previously been made in terms of being strategic, being more evaluative, looking at that. So it's sort of like you've got several one things that add up,
Right.
Start adding up to a bit of a menu. But I want to, but I also want to share like a bit of a sort of comprehensive idea that could maybe wrap all of this together. And that is that I think philanthropy, if it's working at its highest purposes, helps us define the common good. And to see the plight and the aspirations of African American men and boys as part of that common good, that as policy linkers, Angela Blackwell would say that, equity is a good growth policy. It is a way of thinking about it. And when I started thinking about common good, it reminded me of something that Barbara Jordan said, who I think is one of the most phenomenal Americans who ever lived. I mean, she was right in the heart of a national controversy with Watergate. This is a bit of a history lesson for folks who may not have been born then. She was in Congress and she was a lawyer. She was one of our best, came out of a historically black college at Texas Southern University. And one of the things that she said, she always talked about the Constitution as an aspirational document. And so it would push up against this notion of what the founding fathers, and you literally have to think of it that way, not founding mothers, but the founding fathers thought about the country and how we needed to always be pushing ourselves as Americans and as Africans in America and as Latinos in America, whoever we are. But here's what she said. She said, what the people want is simple. They want an America as good as its promise. That as a nation, we live up to our historical promise of equality of opportunity. We believe that the gap between the promise and reality can one day be closed if each of us remembers that we share a common destiny. But the great danger America faces is that we will become a collection of interest groups, city against suburb, region against region, individual against individual, each seeking to satisfy private wants. In this year, and she said this in the 70s, we must define the common good and begin again to shape a common future. I think philanthropy can play a huge role in that convening role, in that catalyzing role, to bring these ideas to bear, and to sort of see it as a grass top plus grassroots endeavor. So systems change and system align where the majority of our public resources sit, in our education system, in our prison system, in our social services system, to align those toward the needs of a common destiny, toward a common future that African American men and boys and all folks are part of. But to me, that's systems change, systems reform, systems transformation, actually, systems alignment, taken in tandem with investments at the grassroots level around networks of African American men and boys who work together. I think the leadership development piece is super important if we connect our young men to men in our community who actually know what living is about. And having worked in the youth development field for a long time, there was this moment where we almost said that, well, young people know everything, so they have the wisdom, let's just follow them. And that's not right. Sorry. That's not right. That we can learn from young people, and young people can learn from older folks, and we need to have a much more robust exchange and engagement about what matters. So I think that if foundations were to focus on that common good, and the two prongs of that common good are systems change and reform, systems transformation, and that notion of helping build and support organic networks of African American men that are working throughout the state and the country, then we're going to have a much better chance of getting to that tipping point that we talked about earlier.
Thanks for sharing that quote with us. As you were reading it, I was replacing in my head the word America with the word philanthropy, and you could say the same thing about philanthropy, that we're here today to figure out how to make philanthropy live up to its promise, too. Sure. And along those lines, we have one more question that builds on that, and in the interest of time, I'm going to skip to the last question that I have for the panel and then let you all in on the conversation. The title of the session and the title of the Foundation Center's report asks, where do we go from here? How can foundations who are already engaged deep in this work, what's the entry point for foundations not already doing this work? So a little bit different twist from the one thing we can do that might be intended for those already who have been in this work, but more what's the entry point? Any takers? Mark?
I can start.
Okay.
As a recipient of. But for me, I think when we think about the work that we're leading at Policy Link and at Root Cause, the Leadership and Sustainability Institute, I think the big call to action is for folks to not only think locally but to also think nationally, to think beyond the sort of parameters of your geographic jurisdiction, to think about if you're working on whatever issues, how does that bleed beyond the sort of natural geographic boundaries that you're used to working within, and connect to different partners or stakeholders who can help you have a more pronounced impact in those broader areas. For us, the work that we're doing is national, and it's predicated upon really prioritizing relationships with people at the local level who are moving work in cities and states throughout the country, right? Because that's where the rubber meets the road, And so, for us to be impactful, for our work to have any sort of power and meaning, we're in close communication with folks who are actually leading different initiatives locally. So I think whatever you're doing, just make sure that there's a really clear connection to various stakeholder groups at the state level or at the national level, because, as Greg pointed out, there's a lot happening, but the problem is that it's happening in isolation. It's not coordinated. It's dying on the vine in some instances. And so, how do we bring those efforts together in a way that has a more pronounced impact? So connect to different to groups that are doing this work in a more powerful way or in a broader or bigger way, and vice versa. You know, if you're a national group, you know, connect with folks who are doing work on the ground and support that.
And anybody else have comment on where we go from here?
Well, I would just add to Mark's point, which I think is a great point, that there needs to be a level of communication one step further at the local level, and really getting to know who's in those communities. If, for example, as Sean Dove and Campaign for Black Male Achievement, they want to really do work here in the San Francisco Bay Area or in the Oakland community, then folks like Mr. Arnold Perkins should be in that room. You know, it's getting to know who's at the root in the center of those communities, the stakeholders who have been there for years, who have an extension to the community members who are considered the pillars there. And I think that's important when you talk about leveraging networks and really building a more cohesive partnership, a more strengthened partnership. I think those are the type of levels of communication and levels of partnership that we need to build when doing this work and thinking about this work.
Yeah. And I just add a couple of thoughts to it as well. I agree with, again, everything that's been said. It's interesting that question is the same title as Dr. King's last book. He wrote his book was called Where Do We Go From Here? And the subtitle was Chaos or Community. And so the notion of like having foundations who haven't been in this work see themselves as helping to engage community. The way that Justin just talked about in terms of find the community leaders who are actually doing this work, give good advice, and don't take 3 years to do a study around like, what do you guys think? Because we've seen foundations do that too. You know, we gotta know what the problems are. Like, let's now come up with innovative solutions. So a couple of things. Newcomers to the field who wanna get engaged ought to get grounded in good practice around equity. The Association for Black Foundation Execs has been offering trainings around the country to foundation boards, staff, and others. It's called Responsive Philanthropy in Black Communities. If you go to AFFI's website, if you call AFFI, if you're interested in that work, you can engage the team of consultants that's been working with AFFI to help foundations and their staffs understand what we mean by racial equity, what are some of the ways you can approach it. So that toolkit and that training is one thing. The second thing is really support, and I'm just going to reinforce what Justin and others have already said, supporting the work on the ground. So these notions of the Black Brotherhood of Elders Network is African American men, people like, see Galen's in the room, around Village Connect, folks from True Vine Church who are doing peace work out in the community. My friend Moshe Milan, who's here, who's a phenomenal cultural artist and is also working around mindfulness practice, but to ground some work in culture, to make sure that African American boys and men, that we actually fund that kind of work. A couple weekends ago, there was this really phenomenal and sort of historic gathering of African American men, Latino men, Native American men, a few folks from other parts of the community, Filipino and others, at a retreat at Asilomar for 2 days, really sharing, so what are the cultural practices in our respective communities that we're using to work with young people in very authentic ways. Because we usually had, just as Du Bois would have said, this sort of double consciousness. A lot of us have worked and hidden that part of ourselves, hidden our spiritual work, hidden our cultural work, and we come to our day jobs wanting to do this other thing and never being, quote, free to do it. You know, and some of my friends were messing with me the other day and say, man, you like Django or something. You got Unchained, right? You know, so it takes a minute for us to, somebody gonna get that joke later, right? So it takes a minute for us to kind of come out of this sort of professional shell that sometimes we find ourselves trapped in, to be able to do the work that we know we gotta do with our communities. And so that gathering had a lot of potential to it. It was the National Compadres Network with Jerry Teo and his folks, and really began into across cultures, because we recognize in our communities, Black kids and brown kids live in the same neighborhoods, they go to the same schools, they're dealing with the same stuff, but yet there's some cultural distinctions between our communities that we need to actually know about, take advantage of, and then be able to do some work. The last thing I'd say is that one of the things that showed up on the Foundation Center's report and timeline was the 2025 Network for Black Men and Boys. This group was originally funded by 21st Century Foundation, which now, unfortunately, has gone out of really the business they were doing. They're now a project of the Tide Center with Toby Tomlinson. Tompkins, thank you. But APFI is now hosting 2025, and that network and networks idea is still in play. One of the most important documents we created as part of that was something called We Dream a World. You can go to APFI's website. You can actually go to the 2025 website and get a copy of this. It's 2025, the number, which the idea was, when we started 5 years ago, if a kid in our community was born that year, what would their life chances be in the year 2025? And so the notion of this report is a national platform around education, around the juvenile justice issues, around health and others, and folks can get a copy of this on that website. So if you're kind of new to the work and want to see a set of ideas that people have sort of deliberated over, that might be another resource that folks can use.
Thanks, Greg. One thing that jumped out at me just as a foundation observer is what you mentioned around the importance of responsive grant making and retaining that, because it seems we're living in a time of strategic grant making and foundations doing away with a lot of the responsive grant making. So thanks for kind of making a voice for keeping that and not swinging so far the strategy direction, particularly when you're working with community-based groups. Others? I think Jason, Ray?
Yeah, I might, I got started in this work, like probably many of us, in the direct service kind of organizations, working in communities, being a volunteer, being on a board, and now work for an intermediary. And I also taking off the RedF hat. You heard from our colleague Kathleen earlier. I co-chair the Bay Area Blacks in Philanthropy Board as well. We have a number of BABIP board members here today, but it's this role of the intermediary. And I think as I looked at this question of how foundations might consider getting started, I think there is some value in the intermediary. I hope I can say that without obviously the bias that I have sitting in one, but because, like Mark was saying about, moving from local and making sure you consider national, I think we also have to think about considering organizations, but also considering ecosystems. And many of the foundations have very specific, even within this broad set of issues that are facing our communities, we have very specific issues: health, economic development. But we know is not a question that these things are interdependent. And so it's risky, and I think this is certainly easier said than done. But if you're sitting at a foundation and you are working, you think there's a really promising initiative at a community level that you want to support, but you recognize from your learning about that issue that it's dependent on maybe another issue that maybe sits outside of your foundation area. If you yourself as an institution can't get around that issue, you get with some other foundations who are working in that area and say, how our two grantees are interacting, and this together, if we're able to bring these streams of thought together and these streams of practice together, we're actually going to have an exponential effect on the outcome. That I think is a unique role that intermediaries can help play in terms of brokering some of those relationships, as well as just some of the knowledge, because they're sitting above, kind of between philanthropy and the community work, and hopefully, if they're doing their jobs well, they have a broad understanding of not just a specific issue area, but how these areas are interrelated. And so to the extent that, a foundation's thinking about getting started in these things, working through intermediary types of organizations, even if it's not in a grant-making role, a consultative role, that's essentially what BABIP is this bridge between Black community-serving nonprofits, Black philanthropic professionals, and then Black philanthropists. All these pieces of the puzzle that are going to be necessary if we're going to make the kind of impact we want to make. But being able to come and plug into an organization like that and really have a dialogue, I think, will be helpful.
Thanks, Jason. And Ray, I want to give you a chance to weigh in, but I also want to alert everybody that after Ray's remarks, I'll be opening it up for Q&A and letting you in on the conversation. So I want to encourage you to line up here so that your question gets picked up by the mic. And just as you're thinking about your question, select one that's general enough so that your colleagues in the room can benefit from the answer. If it's hyper-specific to your situation, we suggest sticking around to talk to the panelists individually. And when you ask your question, let us know if it's for an individual in particular on the panel or the panel as a whole. And Ray.
Yeah, just two last points. One actually was touched on earlier, but I wanted to emphasize it, and then that is, think about, like, in terms of the foundations that are doing this work already, think about how they are part of a broader kind of a collective impact strategy. For us, it's obvious because we're a health foundation. We recognize that we can't get to a lot of the issues that young men of color and Black males are concerned about, and so we can't do the work without partnerships. So, and it's better to actually do that in an intentional way. So we need to kind of understand what others are doing in the field so that our health work can be plugged in. And so how do we do that better? We can certainly do that better for those folks that are in that work. I think for those that are getting in, it's very difficult to get foundations to do like just entirely new different things. So like you looked at like the list of funders that are intentionally investing in black male work, and it's like a handful of folks. So, and the field is gigantic. So I think it's again, it came up earlier, is how do you get those other foundations that are already doing work that are important for black males, right? Education, health, but how do you get them to do their work better so that they can actually achieve the goals that they set out? Because I don't think you can achieve those goals unless you are smart about how to deal with issues that are really at the root of those disparities. So if there's ways in which you can support those foundations to be better at what they do, it's like within their like sweet spot, right? It's not asking them to create a black male achievement program. It's about how can you get your education work to be really impactful to communities that are experiencing the worst outcomes. So, you know, I think it's part of what Greg said about how do you help foundations do equity work, you know, excellently. And again, that's a challenge too, but I think that might be easier than trying to get folks to create something completely brand new.